Animation was my life since I could hold a pencil. My childhood bedroom walls were plastered with hand-drawn frames from The Lion King and Aladdin. Hundreds of sketches trying to capture that Disney magic. While other kids were playing sports, I was teaching myself Maya and 3D Studio Max on a computer that could barely run them. My parents worried about me spending so much time alone, hunched over a drawing tablet. But I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my life. When I finally landed a QA testing position at DreamWorks Animation in 2000, it felt like everything was falling into place. Sure, it wasn't exactly my dream job. I wanted to be an animator, not just someone who checked their work. But it was a foot in the door. Everyone had to start somewhere, right? And DreamWorks was working on something revolutionary. A fully CGI animated feature that would compete with Pixar. They called it Shrek, and even in its rough early builds, I could tell it was going to change everything. Little did I know how right I was, in the worst possible way. Looking back, there were signs something was off from the beginning. The animation team had quirks. They'd never start rendering without placing small onions in a perfect circle around their workstations. The writers insisted on meeting only at sunset, in a room with no sharp corners. And every morning, I'd find the cleaning crew washing away strange symbols drawn in green chalk outside the rendering farm. Management called them team-building exercises and artistic motivation techniques. But I saw how senior animators would whisper to their monitors late at night, how they'd collect their own tears in small vials during crunch time, how certain frames would only render correctly under a new moon. I told myself it was just studio culture, the kind of weird traditions any creative team develops during a long project. God, I was naive. Most of my job involved checking for animation glitches and audio sync issues. Mundane stuff, really. But late one night while doing overtime in the QA lab, I found something I wasn't supposed to see. The senior animators had their own private screening room, a dark space behind the rendering farm that was always locked. That night, though, the door was slightly ajar. Inside on a desk was an unmarked DVD labeled only with a post-it note. Build 743.5X-Sonic Survey-Senior Eyes Only. I knew I should have just walked away. Left it for the morning shift supervisor to deal with. But something drew me to that disc. I grabbed the DVD, hurried back to my testing booth, turned on my monitor, and pressed play. The DreamWorks logo appeared normal, though the audio seemed slightly off. The usual triumphant orchestral flourish was replaced by something that sounded like it was being played backward through a tin can. Then the screen went black for exactly 47 seconds. I remember checking my watch twice. When the movie finally started, it wasn't the familiar all-star opening I'd seen hundreds of times before. Instead, the camera slowly panned across Shrek's swamp in complete silence. The animation quality was different. Unsettling in its precision, the water moved with an unnatural stillness, each ripple too perfect, too deliberate. The first sign something was wrong came when the camera reached Shrek's hut. The usual warmly lit windows were dark, and the structure seemed to pulse slightly, like it was breathing. As the camera pushed in through the door, which was unusual, in every other build we always cut to the interior, I noticed the textures on the walls were wrong. What should have been rough wood grain instead looked like stretched and distorted faces, all silently screaming. Shrek sat in his chair, facing away from the camera. The fire in his fireplace cast strange shadows that didn't match its movement. When he spoke, it wasn't Mike Myers' voice either. It wasn't any voice. It was like 1,000 whispers, layered on top of each other, a few in languages I didn't even recognize.
You're all wearing masks. Every single one of them,
he said. The camera slowly circled to face him. His eyes were different. Not the stylized animation I was used to, but something else entirely. They looked carved, ancient, like they'd been stolen from some statue and forged into his face. And they looked like they were filled with a terrible awareness of something.
Do you want to see what's under them?
Before I could process what was happening, the scene changed. It was the familiar sequence where Shrek encounters the fairy tale creatures in his swamp. Their character models were glitching, polygons stretching into impossible shapes. When they moved, they left trails in the air like a torn reality. Pinocchio's nose grew with every step, but instead of rounded, it was sharp on the end, like a spear. The three little pigs' houses weren't made of straw, stick, and bricks. They were built from teeth, hair, and bone. And Donkey? Donkey just stood in the background, staring directly at the camera. His mouth stretched into a smile that was far too wide and filled with far too many teeth. The audio was desynchronized now. Voices played in reverse, overlapped with what sounded like carnival music, slowed down like 800%. Below it all was a steady rhythmic thumping that matched my heartbeat exactly. Then came the scene that still haunts me. Shrek began peeling his own face off, layer by layer, like an onion. But it wasn't graphic or gory. Under each layer was another face. Sometimes Lord Farquaad's, sometimes faces I recognized from my own life. My mother, my childhood best friend, my first girlfriend. All of them with fear in their eyes. The deeper he peeled, the more the animation style shifted. CGI gave way to traditional animation, then crude drawings, then cave paintings, then symbols I'd never seen before, but understood on a deep, primal level. At the 90-minute mark, all sound cut out except for a low hum. The screen showed Shrek's swamp again, but now it stretched infinitely in all directions. Every tree was crowned with a hanging body, each one a fairy tale character, twisted into something awful. Snow White with too many limbs, Geppetto with wood grain growing through his skin, the big bad wolf turned inside out. The camera began to pull back, revealing more and more of this infinite swamp of horrors. As it did, the bodies began to move in unison, all turning to face the camera. Their mouths opened in perfect synchronization, and a single voice came through my headphones. My own voice, from a conversation I hadn't had yet.
Some stories don't end. They just keep adding layers.
The screen went black, and my computer crashed. When I rebooted, the DVD was unreadable. My supervisor had no record of build 743.5X ever existing. When I described what I'd seen, she looked at me like I was crazy and suggested I take some time off. I quit the next day, found a new career far away from animation. But sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I can hear that low hum. And when I look in the mirror, my reflection seems to smile just a little too wide. And I wonder how many layers of the onion I've seen. They released the real Shrek in 2001. I watched it with my niece. It was funny, clever, heartwarming, everything the test audiences loved. But during that scene where Shrek talks about ogres having layers, I had to leave the theater, because I know what's under those layers now. I've seen what's underneath myself. And the worst part? Sometimes at night when everything's quiet, I hear Smash Mouth's All-Star playing faintly in the distance. It's slowed down, distorted, and if you listen carefully to the lyrics, they're not the same. They're telling a different story. A story about masks and layers, and what happens when you peel back reality just a little too far. I've never told anyone this story before, but last week I saw a poster for the new Shrek movie, and in the background, barely visible in the swamp, I saw myself hanging from one of those trees, smiling that too wide smile. Sometimes I think about that little kid I used to be, staying up late with my sketchbook, dreaming about making movies that would touch people's lives. I look at my old drawings now, the ones my mom kept in boxes in their attic. But they're different than I remember. The Disney characters I thought I was copying, they all have those same empty eyes. I've realized that even back then, something was trying to speak through my pencil. Something was trying to show me where animation really comes from. All those hours I spent teaching myself to create, I was really just learning the language of something older. Something that's been telling its stories through every drawing, every animation cell, every rendered frame since the first cave paintings flickered in firelight. I'm not sure how many layers are left to be seen, or if I've gotten to the very bottom, but I know I'm terrified of what I'd find there. Because some stories don't end. They just keep adding layers.